Hello, it's Sophy Ridge here with the Sky News Daily. Well, today we heard publicly for the first time from the former chair of the Post Office, Henry Staunton, when he was questioned by a parliamentary committee. The MPs have been looking for answers as to why it's taking so long for so many sub-postmasters to get the compensation they're owed, but they ended up with questions about the future of the Post Office itself. Now, Mr Staunton stood by his claims that he'd been told to go slow on compensation payments, but he also made allegations about the top management of the Post Office. One of the 5 MPs listening said it made it sound like a complete shambles. Here's the Conservative MP, Jonathan Gullis.
OK, so at the moment now we've got yourself as the former chairman, who was the current chairman at the time, being investigated. We've now got the CEO allegedly now under investigation as well. That's blown my... I was not expecting that answer. Okay, so we've got...
Wasn't that made plain to you, this investigation?
That's the first thing I've heard of Mr Reid's alleged, and I will use that word, alleged investigation, but obviously you're claiming that, and I'll probably let the chair come back on that one, because he's been here longer than me to make sure I don't cross the line, what I say.
That doesn't mean I'm less shocked.
Well, we'll be speaking to the Labour MP Ian Lavery, who is on the Business and Trade Committee. But first, here's our business correspondent, Paul Kelso.
These select committees, you'll know, Sophie, they don't always deliver. We build them up, don't we, as having some political box office. And this one had all the principles, bar 1 or 2 in the Post Office saga, present to give evidence. But very often they don't deliver. We find MPs essentially following media lines or just getting what we already knew on the record in Parliament. Well, not this time. It was genuinely, certainly when it came to the end of the day, explosive. It has solidified this sense of a dysfunctional post office, of a board and a government with significant conflicts. It feels like a board at war by the end of today. Meanwhile, the one moment of dignity and calm in the entire day was when 3 sub-postmasters, including Alan Bates, the eponymous hero of the ITV drama, and the lodestone, if you like, for the 900 or so sub-postmasters who have been wrongfully convicted, said that he had no faith in the compensation scheme, even the new one that was being rolled out by the government. One wonders now, after hearing what we've heard in the last hour or 2 of evidence, what he and his fellow sub-postmasters make of an organisation that claims it's doing all they can finally to make good the heinous wrongs of the past, and in fact appears to be fighting like rats in a sack.
Just taking a step back, because I know that this story about the Post Office has been bubbling away for a while, but for me at least, it's really been the last few months that's shown it in sharp relief. The Post Office, it was such a kind of cuddly, warm, fuzzy brand, a brand you could trust. And now it feels like the brand has been totally trashed.
There's some very serious, fresh allegations that have been made that we can get into. And one of the things I thought as I was listening to both the former chairman, Henry Staunton, and the current chief executive, Nick Reid, giving evidence, certainly Mr Reid, still in post, still in his job, still trying to navigate this catastrophic legacy, was setting aside the truth or otherwise of what's been alleged this afternoon. What a job it is trying. You've not only got to navigate this epic miscarriage of justice and corporate wrongdoing, but you've also got somehow to fashion a functioning long-term business model out of an organisation that was already under massive pressure and has now, as you say, had its what was left of its reputation utterly ground into the dirt.
I want to get on to the allegations and the he said, she said in just one moment, but just first, what on earth happens to the Post Office now? I mean, we heard from Alan Bates, didn't we, this idea of just selling it to Amazon for £1. I mean, surely something like that isn't going to happen, is it?
It was typically direct and slightly unexpected from Alan Bates. He has had throughout this, he has been the one who has refused to bend to any attempts to silence him. He's refused compensation. He's corralled sub-postmasters. And when he was asked his view, he said, what did he call it? A dead duck. The Post was a dead duck. It is a money pit and will continue to be a money pit. We should sell it to Amazon and be done with it. Now, Amazon does a wonderful job, but I'm not entirely convinced its record on employment practices is one you necessarily want to repeat wholesale. but it rather pithily summed up the challenge of an organisation that's facing just huge competition as much as anything else on all fronts. There are still some core services that the Post Office is trusted to deliver and that is required to deliver, and that the private sector, the purely private sector, won't necessarily step in to take. But it is a long road. And one thing I would say is I don't think it can start that process or really complete or put together a plan for the future until it has dealt with the running sore of the sub-postmasters and this miscarriage of justice.
Let's talk a bit about this extraordinary row between the former chairman and the current business secretary. Did we get any more light shed on whether it is true that the former chairman was effectively lent on to delay the compensation payments?
I think in the round on that, we aren't really any closer. To restate the context quickly, Henry Staunton, a serial boardroom figure. He's 75 now, I think. A long career, chairman of ITV, among other big organisations, very experienced, brought in to try and bring some order to the Post Office, can you believe? Fired by Kemi Badenoch earlier this month in the wake of the ITV drama that brought the Post Office back to public attention. He claimed in an interview about a week later with the Sunday Times that he'd been told to slow down compensation. Now, that's utterly toxic for the government because all their efforts at the moment are at, let's take it in good faith, at trying to speed compensation along, to react to public outcry and to get compensation out quickly. And to do that, they want to exonerate all the sub-postmasters at once by changing the law, so cutting out the judiciary. It's a huge constitutional step, if nothing else. So to have the chairman saying that months before this effort started, he was told to slow it down, that's really bad for the government. So that's been strongly denied. And this morning we heard from directors of the Post Office, one of whom is also a director of the Department of Business. The other one is the senior independent director, the SID, as they refer to him in the jargon. And they both repeated the same allegations about Mr Staunton, that he had tried to quash a whistleblower investigation into his own conduct, that he tried to interfere inappropriately in the appointment of the next senior independent director, and that his behaviour was erratic. Now, if it wasn't coordinated as an attempt to set the ground for Mr Staunton, discredit him before he appeared, it was certainly evidence that was corroborated by the two gentlemen as they gave evidence separately. So keen is the government to get its point of view across that Ms Badenoch's team was sharing transcripts of that evidence with journalists before Mr Staunton arrived. So we sit there thinking, OK, well, what are we going to hear from him? Now, when it comes to was he right to interpret the senior civil servant and his account of conversations with Kemi Badenoch, there was a go slow. We didn't get any further, except he absolutely sticks by it. He was asked again and again and again. One MP put it to him, you're the only person we've heard from today who believes that that was the case, but he's absolutely sticking by it. But what we did get is this new front, which is in response to these allegations that were made about his conduct before he appeared. He said, well, they're a byproduct of something else. An investigation into the chief executive, Nick Reed, who's fallen out with his HR director. There's an 80-page dossier about his conduct. I'm mentioned in passing. And more than that, Mr Reed told me he wanted to resign at least 4 times. He then, just for good measure, added that at one point he'd vaguely raised the prospect of a pay rise for Mr Reed, who said he wasn't happy about his salary, with Grant Shapps, then the business secretary, who told him not to waste the price of a stamp. So perhaps the most politically and practically germane issue, was there a slowdown on compensation or not? I don't think we're any further, but we are in this new realm where the chief executive, an hour before Mr Staunton said he'd definitely not ever thought about resigning, suddenly we hear he'd repeatedly talked about resignation, he'd asked for a pay rise, and we now await a response. We have a whole new front and a board that appears to have been in conflict, barely concealed conflict throughout the period, being told that all their focus is on the sub-postmasters, and it certainly doesn't quite feel like that at the end of the day.
It's absolutely extraordinary. And like you say, we need to await the response of Nick Reed. We haven't heard from him after this claim was made. But like you say, it does feel like rats fighting in the sack, doesn't it? Trying to apportion blame, trying to emerge with their own reputations intact.
Yeah, and certainly you get below the senior executive level, at the officials involved, it all sounded like they are pretty horrified of what's going on. They want to get the money out the door to the sub-postmasters as quickly as possible. But they're a new layer of bureaucracy on top of previous layer after layer of bureaucracies that bit by bit have had to be persuaded to abandon the lie that put sub-postmasters in jail, forced some of them into taking their own lives. This was an institution that we will wait the results of the inquiry before we say exactly how strongly we can put it, but it used discredited evidence it knew it was false, to pursue people for theft and false accounting with desperate consequences for them. It's had to face up to that failure. And if you're a sub-postmaster sitting on the side, or the lawyers we heard who represent them, trying to pick your way through that Kafkaesque maze to try and work out which compensation scheme you're eligible for, when you might get some money. We heard from one sub-postmaster, Tony Downey. He ran through what had happened to him as a result of this. He had to sell his business. He went bankrupt. He moved out of the village he'd lived in practically overnight without saying goodbye to anyone. He had a mental breakdown, and then he moved abroad for 15 years, and he's only recently returned to the UK to give evidence. So an utterly devastating toll on an individual. And he then explained that he's still quibbling with the process about when his mental health condition began and how it applied to his compensation. And away from the drama and the almost slapstick at times of these claims and counterclaims, you have to be reminded that this is a human story with people being utterly, utterly failed by a company, an institution, and some of them say still.
Yes, absolutely unbelievable, isn't it? And really important to remind us on that as well. That at the heart of this is the difficulty on claiming compensation and how slow it has been. Paul, thank you so much for talking to us today and explaining what on earth is going on. Now we're going to take a quick break, but when we're back, what does this latest chapter in the Post Office scandal mean? Welcome back. Well, Ian Lavery is a Labour MP. He sits on the Business and Trade Committee, and he's here fresh from that committee hearing.
I'm not sure if I'm fresh from the committee. I've got to be absolutely honest. It's been like a marathon session with some real important revelations, but I'm sure we'll come on to that.
What revelation stands out to you then? What would you say was the moment when you thought, oh my goodness, I can't believe I just heard that?
I think the revelations came in the last hour or so with the former chairman of the Post Office, Mr Staunton, who was very relaxed, wouldn't row back at all on his suggestions, like on the Sunday Times article saying that he was asked to basically slow down compensation payments and limp onto the general election. He wouldn't row back on that at all. Somebody is not telling the truth. It's as simple as that. This evidence session was to try and understand what was happening with the three different schemes in the Post Office scandal. But it basically uncovered a whole number of things. He also said, which is very interesting, that Mr Reid had confided in him, that's Mr Staunton, saying that he was ready to resign his job. And he said he had done that on numerous occasions. But interestingly enough, the chair, Liam Byrne, asked Mr Reid when he was in front of the committee, had he ever considered resigning? And he said, not ever. And Mr Reid was speaking under oath.
There's so much to unpick. Firstly, on, as you say, the kind of extraordinary row between the former chairman of the Post Office, Henry Staunton, and the Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch. As you say, someone is not telling the truth. I guess the Business Secretary says she's right that Mr Staunton is effectively either misleading people or has misremembered. And there was a bit of evidence to support that today, wasn't there? So, the Post Office Chief Executive, Nick Reid, insisting the government never told him to slow down compensation payments. Department for Business official Carl Cresswell saying the same. I mean, how are you ever going to work out where the truth lies?
I'm not too sure. I mean, the whole idea of trying to get to the bottom of the situation, have a select committee. It's very rare, that we put people on oath, but it was decided that would be the best case. Nick Reid the chief executive of the post office, Mr Criswell, who represents the business and trade department, and others, all said that they believe that Mr Staunton wasn't correct in what he was saying. This is a man who's been like the chairman of W.H. Smith. He's been vice chairman of Ladbrokes, and there's a long line of jobs that this fella has done. How do you call him a liar? And, I think we got off the main issue, and the main issue was how do we speed up compensation for the sub-postmasters and people employed by the post office and people employed at the time who lost everything.
I, like you, I'm sure, have interviewed some of them myself. I watched the drama series as well, and it is just so sickening. And there's something that kind of touches all of us, isn't there, I think? And these people who are just trying to do the right thing, trying to make a life for their family, trying to be a pillar of their communities, they had trust in the justice system, and it all just blew up in their face, that trust. I mean, it sounds like the management of the post office was, I guess, a bit of a shambles.
Well, I think when you look, Sophie, at the conclusion of the meeting, you've got the chief executive, allegedly, the chief executive, Nick Reid, under investigation. You've got the former chairman of the post office under investigation. What on earth's gone on at the post office? I mean, we were not made aware of the fact that the chief executive was under investigation. That was revealed by Mr Staunton.
Can I come in there? Because I do find this quite astounding. I'm right in saying, aren't I, that you didn't know about that until Mr Staunton effectively blurted out that Nick Reid, the chief executive, was also the subject of an 80-page HR report. Don't you think someone should have told you if that's true?
You would have thought that he at least would have informed the chairman of the select committee that he was under investigation. We were absolutely taken by surprise. And I think what Alan Bates suggested, he says we should be closing the post office down. It's not fit for purpose. His idea of selling it for £1 to another organisation, I'm not sure whether I agree with that, by the way, but you've got to question whether the post office in its present position is actually fit for purpose. Alan Bale made the point, stop calling it compensation. It's not compensation, it's redress of financial loss, which is quite different. We should be focusing on the victims, and we weren't at the finish. We're focusing on.
I guess it's important to say, look, we don't know what this HR report is about Nick Reid. He hasn't had a chance to come out yet and explain. We don't know if it's true or not, but as you say, quite a bombshell to kind of drop into a committee session. You touched there on what happens next, and really this is the key, isn't it?
There's got to be some focus put on what happens next with the post office. But again, Sophie, we've got to focus on what happens next with the compensation, with the redress of finances to these individuals. Well, listen to a chap called Tony Downey, and I've spoken to Tony after the meeting. Tony was a sub-postmaster. He was accused of the accountant was wrong. He had to pay him money back. His family were gutted by it, the fact that he was basically called a thief. He was banished from his own community. He ran away, his words, not mine, and he went to Spain. He's only just returned. That's like, I think that was like 10 or more years ago. He's only just returned once last month and for the hearing today. And I was talking to his daughter, who was actually at the hearing as well. And I just said, what was your reaction? And she said, I blame my father. He says, I blame me mother and father. I was left school within 2 days here in the UK, and I was living in Spain. I've never seen my friends, couldn't speak to them, and I blamed me mother and father for years. It's only now that I'm understanding what this miscarriage of justice has meant for my family. It's virtually destroyed me. And that's from the horse's mouth. That's from Tony Downey's lovely daughter this afternoon.
Your heart just goes out hearing stories like that as well. The one that stayed with me is I spoke to a woman called Janet Skinner, who didn't tell her children about it until the day that the trial, when she was sent to jail. I just can't imagine what that must have been like as a mother, just worrying about whether you're going to be able to see your kids. The shame for something that you haven't even done. It's extraordinary.
I didn't have any cases or should I say, nobody come forward in my constituency at all until after the ITV dramatisation. But since then, I've had a whole number. But I'm also aware of a number of former postmasters and postmistresses who were convicted. They paid the money back and haven't spoken of it since. And when I've tried to reach out to them, there seems to be some sort of reluctance. They want to keep that in the past, despite the fact that these were innocent people. Their lives were destroyed, their finances, family finances destroyed. They're still reluctant at this moment in time to come forward to see if they can get any form of financial redress. And I'm afraid, I believe that there'll be hundreds of people who worked as sub-postmistresses, sub-postmasters, who worked as general workers in these post offices, who will never, ever, ever come forward, despite the fact that they know their rights and they know that there could be compensation available for them.
As both Ian and Paul has been saying, it's one of those stories that feels very, very complex, and it's hard to work out what the truth is, to be honest. But actually, at the heart of it, it's really simple. It's about people who were trying to do the right thing, who were a big part of their communities, who were trying to provide for them families, and they came up against a miscarriage of justice that is, I'll be honest, the greatest that I can remember in my lifetime. And it feels like today, what came through loud and clear is they still don't feel like they've got that justice that they need. That is all for today, but do join us for tomorrow's Sky News Daily.